All righty, ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and get started here. Good morning. My name is Kyle Canny. I'm a policy analyst here at the Hunt Institute, and I'd like to welcome you to the latest edition of our Governing Principles webinar. We're so glad you're able to join us this morning for a conversation we're really excited about, a discussion around educator effectiveness. Before we get started, I want to start with a few logistical notes. We'll be keeping everyone on mute throughout, but we'd love to hear from you. We have two different ways you can do that. A significant portion of our time will be dedicated to answering your questions, so be sure to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We'll do our best to get to as many of the questions today as possible. We also welcome you to tweet throughout. Whether you have questions or comments, please use the hashtag #GovPrinciples, which you see on your screen now. Our team will be live tweeting throughout the conversation, so we hope you can join us in the discussion there as well. You know, teacher quality has been one of the most significant areas of focus in education policy over the last few decades, and policymakers at all levels have worked to strike the delicate balance between using evaluation systems as a tool for accountability and also a means for teacher development. We're so excited to have a panel of experts here today to discuss how policymakers can work to navigate this challenge and opportunities that can help make our systems more efficient and reliable. I'd now like to introduce today's moderator, Laverne Srinivasan of the Carnegie Corporation in New York, to lead us in today's discussion. Laverne, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Kyle, and thank you to the Hunt Institute for bringing this esteemed group of leaders and experts together. And thank you to the audience for joining us in this webinar. Before I turn to our panel, I want to start by setting the context with a few very brief points. First, we would all likely agree that although it is clear that strong teachers are essential for student achievement and student success, identifying and measuring teacher effectiveness has proven difficult. Teaching is complex work, so it's not surprising that no single measure captures all aspects of what goes on in a classroom. States have adopted varying approaches, weighing factors like student academic data, classroom observations, and peer and student surveys, with the goal of developing a system that is rigorous, fair, and can be used as a development tool to maximize teacher growth and potential. Since the reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act in 2015, many states have rolled back some of the more controversial elements of their teacher evaluation systems and returned to local control over these issues. With schools likely resuming full in-person instruction this fall, we expect pandemic-related waivers on teacher evaluation requirements to lift. This presents a tremendous opportunity for states and districts to reflect on their systems and to consider what lessons we can glean from this pause on teacher evaluations. We are so fortunate to have these great leaders and experts with us today to discuss what makes an effective teacher evaluation system and how states and districts can strengthen the ones they currently have in place. I'll introduce each panelist as I ask the first question of each of them. I'll start with the Honorable Jamie Woodson, who has served at the forefront of Tennessee's work to raise student achievement during a time of historic gains. First as a state legislator and later as executive chairman and CEO of the State Collaborative on Reforming Education, SCORE. She has helped lead the state's student-centered approach to meaningful reform. She is currently the founder and principal of TriStar Strategies, LLC. Senator Woodson, while at SCORE, you led a listening tour regarding Tennessee's teacher evaluation system, which informed a report and recommendations to improve the system. 6 years later, 74% of teachers reported that the teacher evaluation process helped improve their practice. Can you tell us what you learned through this process and how it can inform how other states approach this work?
First, thank you, Laverne. I'm excited to have an opportunity to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is great teaching and great instruction. I think first, context really matters. So in 2010, I had been in the legislature since 1998. I had been through periods as a policymaker where we received data where we were proudly proclaiming that our kids were dunking on an 8-foot basketball goal, all the while knowing that they needed to compete on a 10-foot goal. And so we went through a series of systemic reforms, first in policy and then in the implementation process, that included teacher evaluation, but it was also standards aligned to rigorous assessments, using data to inform instruction, and how to really think about how to recruit, retain, support our great teachers and support all teachers. And so it's in that context in 2010 where we saw sweeping reforms in the state and significant implementation. And so as with any systems change, there's inevitable challenges in an implementation process, right? And so we had lots of positive, we thought we had lots of positive lessons learned, but we also wondered, we're getting too much feedback that there was an opportunity for improvement. And so Governor Haslam did a really important thing. Number one, he said, we're not going to relitigate this in the legislative halls. And we're also going to listen to educators and understand at the local level what's happening on the ground so that we can ensure that our goals for this system, which is to empower educators, to improve instructional practice, and to ultimately support students in their path to economic mobility and economic success. How do we think about that? And so we've gone from, like many states did, a kind of a relatively binary system to multiple measures. Teachers were only getting evaluated 2 to 3 times every decade. The new system allowed for multiple measures, but also allowed for annual evaluation with multiple observation. Feedback was required in the new model. In the old model, you might get feedback 2 or 3 times every decade, but it probably wasn't related to instructional practice, and teachers didn't feel like it was particularly helpful. And so the new model required annual multiple measures, feedback that's aligned to that so we can drive instruction. And so I think all of that in the old system didn't allow for those evaluation systems to inform personnel decisions, and the new system did. And so lots of feedback on the ground. And so for Tennessee, the governor said, we're going to have an internal review through the Department of Education, and we're going to ask an independent organization, independent of government, to actually go and listen. And that looked like a lot of different things. We not only had roundtables across the state, we surveyed and gave the opportunity for multiple surveys for every educator in the state, a team of teachers, 22 over the course of multiple months, to actually dig in and wrestle down that feedback, internal expert in-depth interviews, national scope on what the relevant research would allow. And that ultimately gave a tremendous amount of feedback about what was happening. And I think the governor's hypothesis at the time, certainly mine, was, is this a policy challenge or is this an implementation challenge? And so what we learned a lot from the process, we learned a few things, and I'll try to wrap this up because I know my colleagues will have a lot to say as they share about this, but we learned a lot. We learned that teachers had a much clearer and more rigorous understanding of what their performance expectations were. We learned that there was a much better understanding across educators about what great instruction looks like and how to define it and how to have a common language around it. We learned that both clear expectations and regular feedback actually increased both self-reflection in teachers as well as collaboration among teachers in a building, whether grade level or across subject areas. We learned that there was an increase in the use of student data to drive instruction as a result of the implementation of the process. And we learned that, boy, once you start giving feedback, you better start giving individualized, high quality, highly collaborative professional learning opportunities for teachers. And so we had that opportunity. We also learned that implementation was inconsistent across the state. Principals and evaluators were at different levels of capacity on how to support teachers in those critical conversations. And so that ultimately resulted in big buckets of recommendations that were some, funding issues, that whether it was personalized training, state board policy changes, and refinements in the legislative structure of it. But it wasn't a relitigation of to do it or not. It was how we as a state could have a mindset that we were asking teachers to have, right? How do we continually improve? How do we listen to feedback? And how do we refine this system to ensure that our goals of student success are ultimately realized? So we learned a lot, and we continue to learn a lot, even since 2011 when we did the initial study.
Thank you, Senator Woodson. Thank you so much for those informative lessons learned. I just want to underscore how important, as you noted, context is, and that to become more effective in both serving our students and supporting our teachers, it's going to be critically important for us to employ that learning systems framework that you just talked about. Getting that kind of feedback, engagement with teachers and multiple stakeholders, as well as listening, are going to be important components of developing the kind of system that you just shared that Tennessee has been successful in developing. So thank you for that. Next, let's turn to Governor Jane Swift. She's the first and only woman to ever serve as governor for the state of Massachusetts. As a state senator, lieutenant governor, and governor, Swift was a strong advocate for the policies and funding priorities that catapulted Massachusetts to become the nation's top-ranked state in educational performance. She is currently the president and executive director at Learn Launch, a nonprofit dedicated to driving innovation by supporting education stakeholders in New England. Governor Swift, teacher evaluation policy has evolved rapidly over the last 2 decades, and like most initiatives, the rate of change at the state level differs greatly from that at the local level. Efforts on the ground are more nimble and can respond to community needs more efficiently than state level policy. However, they often lack the broader impact needed to really move the conversation forward. How can we ensure state level policy keeps up with the more pragmatic implementation level innovations and private practice implementations that align these efforts to maximize their impact through a coherent policy?
Well, thank you so much. And I think that Senator Woodson actually set this up perfectly in talking about that dichotomy between policy and implementation. You know, the speed with which the world is changing and working after I left public office in the ed tech arena, it just makes your head spin, right? Like there is such an opportunity to leverage innovation as a tool for all of us to make sure our children are getting the full benefit of our public education system. But for all of us, you know, it used to be, I'm probably the oldest one on this. I don't know, we could have a challenge here, but you know, I still, you know, think about having to struggle to program the VCR, and now I don't have to worry about it anymore because we don't have VCRs, and now the TV programs itself for me. It tells me what I want to watch, but you know, it's just so rapid how things are changing. So how do we keep up with that at a policy level, where as a senator knows, you know, our democratic system has many protections that design it to work slowly. The other beauty about implementation at the local level, when you do it well, is it does have that flexibility to respond to context, which I love that Senator Woodson talked about context. The work I do today at Learn Launch, we're working with school and district leaders who are dealing with unimaginable challenges, whether it is student and adult and family emotional issues coming out of this pandemic, the need to drive equity-centered education with the Black Lives Matter movement and the recognition about the racism that still pervades so many of our schools and society across the country, the unfinished learning and learning loss that's just been a desperate need. Principals and superintendents have a cascade of new issues while they're still dealing with the issues that have always challenged them in managing a school system. But we do also have to have standards, right? And we need to make sure that there is a basic level at which we can guarantee every parent, every community that their children are learning. One of the ways that we sought to tackle that in Massachusetts was by looking at new teacher programming and having, which still exists today, a basic level of foundational knowledge. There's a lot of research that is compelling that establishing foundational knowledge, particularly in math, and I happen to have a daughter who's a math major. She shows me things she's doing that I don't understand, to be completely honest, but she's in her 4th year of her math major. And but foundational math knowledge is a key to being an effective math teacher. How do we ensure that students have that foundational knowledge? We've used a testing system in Massachusetts to ensure that for new teachers. And I am thrilled that Dr. Salazar is going to talk to us about new ways of assessing incoming teachers and existing teachers, so that, again, right, multiple measures, different ways of addressing this issue to make sure that the equity concerns and that the ability to have classrooms with teachers who reflect the population that they're serving are available. And so I think the pace at which change is happening requires that we have flexibility. And one of the ways that we've done that in Massachusetts is to have alternative certification paths that allow you, when appropriate, to have opportunities to find those pathways, assuming a base level of knowledge into teaching. So thank you for letting me talk about that pace of innovation, the policy versus implementation challenges. And I'm thrilled to be here with the other panelists today, and I'm excited to hear Dr. Salazar talk about the challenge of making sure, however we do these, however we implement these policies, to make sure that they're fair.
Thank you so much, Governor Swift. I appreciate the focus on both the challenge of understanding the role of policy versus implementation that both you and Senator Woodson have raised. I think that's critically important. And I also appreciate you raising up the focus on supporting families and students in these challenging times, and in the context of the tremendous social justice and inequity issues that we're grappling with along with COVID. Our third panelist is Dr. Maria del Carmen Salazar. She's a professor of teaching and learning science at University of Denver's Morgridge College of Education. She's authored numerous publications on humanizing pedagogies, equitable and effective teaching, and culturally responsive teaching, as well as college access and success for Latinx students. Dr. Salazar has also served on the Interstate Teacher Assessment and Support Consortium and the Colorado Quality Teachers Commission. Dr. Salazar, much of your recent work aims to measure cultural competence as part of pre-service and in-service teacher evaluations to better serve culturally and linguistically diverse learners. Can you tell us about this work and how teacher evaluations can serve as a tool with which to tackle inequality and inequity?
Yes, I greatly appreciate the question and the focus, and also the comments of our panelists as well. I heard words like performance, policy, implementation. For me, it's all about impact. I am an immigrant and a child of immigrants. My father has a 3rd grade education. My mother has a 6th grade education. And I am the only one in my family of 7 siblings with a college education. For me, it's about how are we impacting the kids who need quality teachers the most, and communities that need quality teachers the most. At the University of Denver, in our teacher education program, we started to search for a teacher evaluation model around 2010 that would help us meet the needs of children like me and communities like mine, and particularly Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities as we serve the Denver metro area. However, we didn't find anything that met those needs, right? So we decided to create our own tool, and we developed the framework for equitable and excellent teaching. It's called the FEAT. We piloted it, we've tested it and implemented it over 10 years and tested its psychometric properties. What's distinct about the FEAT as a teacher evaluation tool is that we center the needs of children and communities who are culturally and linguistically diverse. We are not an add-on. We are not a sprinkled on approach. We are not throwing in 3 words of diversity in a teacher evaluation tool, right? our needs matter and our needs should be centered in a teacher evaluation tool and the way we learn, and our ways of being and our resources should be there. And so I think that's what's unique, is that we center the needs of our communities in this tool. You'll see words like culture, language, social justice, critical consciousness, racial justice. And we firmly believe that, like Rich Milner believes, a scholar who says there's no neutrality in this work. You're either fighting for equity or you're not. And so we really look at teacher evaluation as a tool that can make a difference and a tool that can make an impact on communities of color. And that really is central to our work. Our teacher evaluation model has 4 dimensions, 5 competencies, 15 competencies, and 62 indicators. It has rubrics of performance. It also has field observation tools that are both formative and summative, but we're always pushing ourselves to improve. The tool never stays stagnant. It changes as our times change and as our needs change. And I think that's also really important in teacher evaluation, that we continue to grow and learn from the current context as well.
Thank you so much, Dr. Salazar. It's so critically important for us to not only remember the importance of multiple measures, but I think I really appreciate your emphasis on keeping current and with the times, and understanding the context that comes up again is so critically important. And I would imagine, Dr. Salazar, you would also second and underscore the fact that not only does that type of evaluation tool benefit and center students of color and their communities, but also is better for all students, quite frankly, will benefit from teachers being prepared and supported and evaluated with that type of tool. Let me turn back to Senator Woodson. Senator Woodson, data is a critical piece of all evaluation systems, but which data states use can vary greatly. How do we know what the right data are? And how can we balance our dual needs for accountability and individual improvement in our data selection?
So a couple of things, and I think it's important just as we frame the conversation. I think everybody on this panel, and I'd say 99.9% of the folks who are participating in this webinar know this, but I tend to be a very simple thinker about certain things. And just to take a step back, why do we even care about teacher evaluation and a system to improve instruction? I mean, the Hunt Institute's got beautiful policy work on the clear research that in school factors, the number one thing we can do is ensure that each and every child experiences a high quality of instruction, not just in one subject, not just for one day, but every subject, every hour of their educational experience, ultimately to prepare that student for the world that waits for them. So they're a lifelong learner, they have the tools that are adaptable for jobs that don't even exist yet. And so it's in that frame, data is the most empowering piece we have. It's how we can inform and serve students as the individuals and special people that they are. There's a kind of a values question of what's the right data. To me, at its essence, is really understanding, are kids able to write? Are they able to read? Are they able to synthesize complex information? Do they have the real world skills at the appropriate age level to ultimately be successful and move into post-secondary and into the workforce in a way where they can achieve their life's goals? They can be economically mobile. They can have choice and opportunity. If they want to live in a rural community, go for it. If they want to live in an urban community, wonderful. If they want to have a big, whatever their dreams are, that they can fulfill them because they've got the tools to do that. And so I think assessment systems really matter. And to the extent that we can compare those beyond the borders of a building, I think is really important, whether it's community to community, state to state. I realize that as a states rightser and someone who believes that in my Tennessee context, it's very important to have local control. I want to know that the students in our state can compete with not only kids next door, but kids all over the planet. And so I think assessment data is really important. I think when I think of data and evaluation system, a few things guide my sort of value structure. Number one is I want to resist the over dependence on any single measure, whether it's one specific assessment, classroom observation and a one hit, whatever it is, multiple measures really does matter. I think for our experience, continually assessing and improving measures of student growth is something that you need to do every single year. What's the latest research? What are we hearing from educators in the field? What does the longitudinal body of research tell us about what's most effective, and be brave enough to adjust course to make sure that ultimately we're advancing student success. I think on the qualitative side, it's pretty clear that not every evaluator or every principal comes in with the same level of skills. And so I do think that making sure that the quality of training, both for teachers and for evaluators, it's really important. They have access to that. They have good assessment tools. They have a continual mindset of improvement in that process. And I think fourth, and this is where I hate to sound cavalier about it, but on data, I hope that we would not have perfection be the enemy of the good. I think that there is no perfect tool, there is no perfect system. And for me, having, whether as a policymaker or otherwise, a mindset of, I want to improve. We have a goal to ensure students are successful. We know that great instruction is a massive tool in that. How do we support teachers in being the best instructional leaders that they can be? And that's my horizon point. And so any single tool is not the only perfect tool. And just that mindset for continual improvement, I think for us has been something that avoids the most treacherous minefields in policy, and also keeps us centered on what do teachers need to support students and what do students need as individuals to be successful.
Thank you, Senator Woodson. I think the learning systems orientation, once again, that you are centered on is so critically important to getting and moving past a sense of compliance orientation around this effort. Dr. Salazar, teacher quality has been one of the biggest issues in education over the last 2 decades. We saw a rapid expansion of evaluation systems following Race to the Top and TP's The Widget Report. But over the last few years, states and districts have increasingly pulled back on these systems. What have been some of the unintended consequences of the push for more rigorous teacher evaluation systems? And how can we seek to overcome these challenges in a way that still maintains teacher quality?
Yeah, I want to start with this idea of student success. I think that's really important. And for me, what I think about when I think about student success is how hard my teachers tried to close that achievement gap that I faced versus the opportunity gap of the quality education that was provided to me. And what my teachers ended up doing was, in trying to close the gap, they worked very hard to assimilate me. And so they took my language and my culture in the process, right? And so I think it's important for us to continue to push around, well, how are we defining student success and how are we defining real world? Are you preparing me for the white world and taking away my own world, right? That I need to be successful, right? I need both of those. I need multiple. I need to be bicultural and multicultural to survive. And so that leads me into the response to this question around more rigorous tools. I don't think we have more rigorous tools. I think we have more standardized tools, right? That's what's been created across the nation, is this sense of standardization, whether that's people using the Danielson framework, which is the most widely used teacher evaluation tool, or state tools being developed. That standardization and teacher evaluation models are created by predominantly white educators who don't often reflect the values in our communities as well, right? So what's happening is we're centering whiteness in teacher evaluation tools, and we're centering the dominant culture while we're pretending that our tools are neutral. In fact, these tools are serving to assimilate our children and rob us of our treasures and rob us of our resources. And so that to me is incredibly important, that we challenge that, and that we challenge the neutrality or supported or purportedly neutral tools that are created. It's not enough to sprinkle a few words of diversity in teacher evaluation tools. Is not enough. our communities need more. And for me, that comes down to teacher quality, is challenging this idea of rigor and challenging this idea of standardization as really whiteification and centering the dominant culture. And so what we need is quality teachers for our children as well, and tools that meet the needs of all children, right? But don't see us as an afterthought, and don't see us as something that I would end there. Don't see us as an afterthought.
Thank you so much, Dr. Salazar. I really appreciate how both you and Senator Woodson have talked about centering value, using values to inform the type of evaluation system that we need, and that we need to be really thoughtful about that, both as it serves the constituent that shares your values, but also potentially can be used to serve all children and create points of comparison that benefit all students. And the focus on student success is obviously critical to that, and what we are all doing this work in service of. Governor Swift, we know there was a teacher shortage before the pandemic, and it's only grown more dire. How do we balance the need to fill positions with the need to maintain quality?
So that's a great question. And I think we also know that we want not just to fill positions, we want to fill positions, as we've been talking about, with quality teachers. We've had a long, robust debate about quality teachers. Am I okay? I just said my thing was unstable. And also making sure that they reflect the community that they serve. And there's great data that says that that's important. We also know that teacher turnover, when we do attract those teachers into those positions of shortage, is not healthy for a community. As I said, our work at Learn Launch has been about addressing these most pressing problems of practice within schools. And we occasionally come across some glimmers of hope. And I'm going to share one of those today. A community in Chelsea that is a community with many challenges that a lot of urban areas face, had significant turnover in their teaching force. Many of their teachers were leaving, and they assumed it was because their pay wasn't always as high as some of the wealthier communities around them. I believe it was Senator Woodson who was talking about using data. Their great HR director, Christine Lee, decided to look at the data to really explore why teachers were leaving. And what she discovered is that many of the teachers who left were teachers who are not from the community. And when they had children of their own, many of the things that many of us who are working moms can relate to, commutes became long, and that was what was driving their turnover. It really wasn't a pay issue. They also used an alternative certification pathway where many of the aides who are working in their school already had a bachelor's degree. Many of them also reflected the diversity of their student population. And so they committed to a program that the teachers bought into, of a Grow Your Own, where they began to work with the professional aides in the classroom to support their pathway to certification. And what happened is they were able to create a more diverse, more stable, high quality workforce. That's one solution. It's one that can be replicated in other communities that have those pathways. It's not going to solve the entire problem. I think we need to address I talked about this on our prep call, transferability of credits at our colleges and universities, so that students who are on a pathway to teaching don't get waylaid when they transfer for a variety of different reasons between colleges or universities. I think we have to discuss how, not many students know. I have 3 daughters in college, their freshman year in college, that they want to teach. I used to teach at a private liberal arts college. Many students graduated from that college and decided to teach, and many of them went into private schools because you can't get certified if you decide you want to teach in your third or fourth year of college. And so that's, I think, a great loss. So I think we have to, again, right, balance this flexibility, quality, standardization with finding and promoting the best folks. And the last thing I'll say, as a parent of this generation of college students, you know, they're often derided for a variety of different things. I have found, both through teaching in particular, many interns who come to work for us at Learn Launch, a great passion to give back and make a difference. And so I think there's a huge opportunity to corral that passion by creating a flexibility for those students to contribute to improving the education system for their younger siblings, cousins, peers, and improving their communities. If we can solve this issue of guaranteeing quality, while at the same time creating pathways and an affordability, frankly, through college and in many cases a master's degree that doesn't always line up with being able to teach in a public school system.
Thank you, Governor Swift. I know we're all going to be experiencing the challenge of taking this moment to reflect on what many have come to realize in the wake of or we're still in it, the pandemic, is a very complex profession, but as you noted, one that is very meaningful. And I don't think anyone would object to the fact that we haven't done our best to lift up and support the teaching profession for all of the value that it builds for all of our young people, but for our country. It's the foundation of our democracy, and we need to start acting like it. Between
Can I
the
say one thing?
Of course, please, please.
So I often say to folks that when people say, oh, why would you let one of your children be a teacher? I ask people if they know who was the lieutenant governor or their state senator when they were in 8th grade, and almost none of them do, but they all know who their 8th grade teacher was.
Absolutely, Governor Swift, absolutely. So that's a challenge, and that's one that requires all of us to value what is going to actually support us to be a strong and meaningful nation, but also one that raises its young people to have the opportunity that we want them to have, and strengthen the country at the same time. Let me just go to this question that we were thinking about. Between the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic and our nation's reckoning with racial justice, the past year has been taxing for us all, but especially for our teachers, right? In response to the pandemic, many states paused their teacher evaluation systems for 2019-2020 school year and adjusted their requirements for the 2020-21 school year. Are there any lessons we glean from the past year and a half? And how should states approach this opportunity to rethink how they measure teacher effectiveness? I'm going to go to each of you for a brief response to this question. And why don't we start out with you, Senator Woodson?
I think it's an important question. I think first, one of the things that I go to sleep thinking about, I wake up in the morning thinking about, is the enormous learning loss that children in our country have experienced. It creates in me a sense of fear for future generations of Tennesseans. It creates in me a sense of urgency to be a part of solutions and how we not only close these important learning loss gaps, but take very seriously the gaps that existed prior to the pandemic and the parts of our systems that just don't work for kids. And so to me, whether it's clear learning loss, in Tennessee, I don't think the data is just out yet, but we'll probably have the lowest post-secondary going rates than we've had in a decade. And we've had historic gains in post-secondary going rates, not only in Tennessee, but across the country. I mean, really clear success. And the pandemic has really made that our goals for gap closure for important student populations and for all students in our state. It's really challenged that. I think, particularly students of color, it's hit them the hardest. And so for me, I think the opportunity is, I hope it's not to relitigate that we need to have an important continual learning environment and evaluation system. I hope it's not to relitigate. We have got to relentlessly focus on a great instructional experience for every single child, particularly historically disadvantaged children. We've got to make sure that our historically disadvantaged kids are receiving the best instruction possible, and we should prioritize that in our talent management systems. That's just what should be true. And so I think for me, I worry that as we move forward in this, we try to overemphasize lessons that still aren't clear from right now and forget that it's just important to make sure you have a teacher evaluation system. It's important that research guides your decisions. It's important to have a continual learning mindset. It's important to get feedback from educators. But you got to do it, because ultimately we've got to make sure our kids are prepared for the world that is here waiting for them. They don't have a choice on whether or not the world's waiting for them. We've got to prepare them. And so for me, it's my great hope that leaders will go through the tough political stuff of knowing how important this is and prioritizing it. And it's not easy work. I mean, Governor Swift said earlier, the policy is one thing, it's the implementation of these policies that really is the tough, unsexy stuff. Not her words, my words. And it just is. It's hard, glass chewing work, and it's worth it. And it's our obligation as leaders to make sure we stay focused, that our kids are actually prepared and we're not just shuffling paper or creating bureaucracies that don't actually move students forward. But the systems do matter. And in my state, we have chosen to face the tough data that we created and tried to manage through it the best we can and improve every chance we can.
Thank you very much, Senator Woodson. Let me turn to Governor Swift. May I get a brief response from you, and then I'll turn to you, Dr. Salazar, for the same question.
Well, I am going to use that hard glass chewing work quote because that is just could not be more true. And listen, I think it's, yes, we need to do the tough work at the policy level, but I don't know who all is on this. I appreciate the Hunt Institute doing this. I appreciate you being here, Laverne. I think it's time for the foundation world to step up as well. And some of them really have, but frankly, a lot of them want to do the sexy, glamorous work, right? They want to tell everybody everything that's working, everything that's been validated, tell you what the perfect is, work with, the early adopters. We could name the school in San Diego that everybody pulls out, who's doing absolutely phenomenal work. But there are kids have been impacted in this pandemic in every single school in America. And so we have to impact at scale. And what principals are dealing with, the social emotional issues, the increase in the opioid epidemic, the fact that families and parents have experienced this from a health standpoint, a financial standpoint in very different ways. We need to start doing the hard glass chewing work, and every part of the ecosystem that claims to be working for kids needs to step up.
Well, thank you, Governor Swift. I had to resist when Senator Woodson said it, but I'll jump on board now. I'm a glass chewer from way back, so I understand and agree that this is the hard work. It's not the shiny object. It's not the silver bullet solution. It's what we need to do to get better. Dr. Salazar, can you share your point of view on this as well, please?
Sure, I would love to. Thank you so much. I think what often strikes me when I'm sitting in schools is that students are receiving the same miseducation I received, right? And so there's this sense of urgency, right? Something has to change, and it feels like we've lost even more during the pandemic, right? So I think I'm hoping that as people are hearing this, just that sense of urgency is so vital and important around change. I also want to highlight the importance of states developing legislation and policy, right? And in the absence of that, districts have to determine and schools have to determine how to do this work. That's what's happening in the state of Colorado, right? There's not an attempt right now to reevaluate the teacher evaluation tools, which are completely outdated. And so districts are coming to me in Colorado to help them do this work. And I want to highlight just one district quickly. I am a graduate of the Denver Public Schools, and I often say that I succeeded despite my education. But today I'm so proud to say that the district is in such a different space and really looking to move forward. And DPS, the Denver Public Schools, is looking to revamp their teacher evaluation tools. And they're looking specifically at racial justice as well, right? So they're doing a great job to say, are we meeting the needs of our community? What do we need to do to impact and focus on racial justice? How do we get not only teacher feedback, but community feedback? That's vitally important, given that the majority, upwards of 80% of teachers are white. They don't reflect the communities they serve. So getting community input is vitally important. I would also add that examining data is vitally important. How are teacher evaluation tools impacting teachers of color in particular, right? And so we often don't look at that as well, whether how they are impacted by these tools. And also the importance of using multiple measures, right? That's also extremely vital because we want to use multiple measures, not only of teacher effectiveness, but of student success as well.
Thank you, Dr. Salazar. I have a question from the audience, and while I'm asking Governor Swift this question, I'll just encourage and remind our audience to ask your questions through the Q&A, and we will attempt to answer them. Governor Swift, even with a return to in-person learning in the fall, online learning isn't going away. How can we adapt teacher evaluation tools to better reflect the challenges and opportunities related to remote instruction while providing meaningful feedback for teachers and students?
Well, first of all, we could start. I'm not sure that we have integrated at all any evaluations or even instruction in what is best practice in how to teach. And I would just say, not just remote, right? Because I think remote teaching was an emergency response. Then there's online teaching, which is the stuff that people spend millions of dollars and a lot of time and research developing, and I think is of a better, hopefully, quality. And then there is blended instruction, is what I call it, instead of hybrid. Blended, which implies that you're utilizing curriculum that is digital in nature. That, to me, blended, which folks took some blended instructional models and used them in hybrid and remote because there was nothing else and it was an emergency. All of those things we need are schools of education, which, by the way, are using them beautifully. As I said, I have 3 kids in college because there were so many, whether you love them or not, post-secondary models of fully online education, and the competitive pressure forced many traditional colleges and universities to adopt platforms and curriculum that had a digital component. It was not perfect. None of my kids loved being locked in their dorm room or being here at home with me, which you can probably all appreciate now. But you know, they did keep learning. Their classes kept going. Everybody had a computer. Everybody, you know, most professors knew how to access Canvas or whatever system they were using. We didn't have that infrastructure in K-12, so that would be a good place to start. We've made billions of dollars of investment figuring out how to utilize it, not as an emergency, but as an instructional tool, just like a pencil or a notebook, I think is going to be critical.
Thank you so much, Governor Swift. I have a question here for you, Dr. Salazar. You referenced the importance of adopting more culturally responsive approaches to teacher evaluations. But as Governor Swift mentioned, sometimes state level policy doesn't move quickly enough to support changes we need now. How can school leaders include culturally responsive practices in evaluation tools that are designed to assess based on a system centered in whiteness?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I know each state varies so much, right? And in our state, it is local control. And so you do need to meet the state standards, but districts can develop their own teacher evaluation tools as well as schools can. And so that allows for a certain amount of freedom as well. I always see the state evaluation tools as the floor and not the ceiling, right? So it's the minimum you need to meet, but you can surpass them, right? And so you can do that even in states that really require one teacher evaluation tool. I know districts and schools that are using, for example, the FEAT that I created, the teacher evaluation tool, as an addendum, as a reflective tool, as a goal setting tool, as a PD tool. So there are ways that you can use tools to supplement your state tools and really focus on that culturally responsive teaching. In one district in Colorado at the Jefferson County Public Schools, we're actually changing the coaching tools as well, right? And so it becomes important if you're changing a teacher evaluation tool that has impact on everything, right? Then you have to change the coaching tools and the leader tools. And so that can often be a big system people struggle with. However, you can use these tools or indicators, right, of performance that you can focus on with PD with teachers and goal setting, so that it's the floor, right? And you can go beyond those teacher evaluation tools that you're using to incorporate culturally responsive teaching.
Thank you, Dr. Salazar. Senator Woodson, you spoke earlier about the issue of capacity for administrators as they are working to fairly and reliably evaluate, support, and develop teachers. How can we support administrators as they are working to strike this balance?
That's such a great question. And in one of the lessons learned that we've experienced, we spent so much time on the teacher evaluation system, we didn't front load that with real capacity supports for instructional leaders, principals as instructional leaders. And so lessons learned from us, it's worthy of focus in your educator and administrator preparation programs, how leaders are trained on the front end. It's important on how they're supported and understand and are able to work with these tools. It's worthy of state funding priority to make sure our principals receive and administrative staff receives the support that they need. Not only is it's just ultimately we're trying to drive improvements in instruction. And when a principal is an instructional leader and understands what great instruction looks like and understands how to provide feedback and individualized, high quality, collaborative professional learning opportunities for teams, that's where the magic happens. And so I think anything that we can do to make sure that the support on the front end and the prep process and all the way through the continual learning process for instructional leaders is also important. And I would say that teacher evaluation, I wouldn't narrow teacher evaluation or educator evaluation just to our teachers in the classroom. I think it's really important for leadership at the school level, at the district level. I just think it's important to have this continual improvement mindset all the way through the system and all the way to policymakers. I mean, ultimately, we've got very clear goals that we want for citizens in our communities, and we need to make sure we're having a constant conversation of, are we achieving the goals that we had? What are we learning? How can we improve the process? And when we know better, we should just do better.
Thank you so much, Senator Woodson. We have time for one final quick whip around question for all three of you, maybe 30-second answer each if you would. We've talked a lot about the challenges of perfecting these systems, especially in the face of the challenges we have had over the last 18 months. What gives you hope as you are thinking about these issues moving forward? Let's start with you, Dr. Salazar.
Oh, thank you. That's a really great question. I think what gives me hope is being in classrooms with children and teachers and seeing how amazing, one, the love of the teachers is, right, for their students, how idealistic they still are and hopeful they are, and how that often translates to their children as well, and how they believe in the potential of all our children to be successful. So it gives me hope, definitely, when I'm in classrooms. I know this is possible, right? It's possible for us to create great schools, great teachers, and really have an impact on kids in a way that shows that we value all of who they are.
Thank you, Dr. Salazar. And I think we all look forward to learning from the work that you're doing to support the districts in Colorado. Governor Swift?
So almost every day this summer, we've been doing online Zoom workshops, and it's been hot and rainy and awful out in Massachusetts. And we've had hundreds of teachers, school leaders, and principals doing the hard work, expressing optimism, getting ready to do the best job they can against unimaginable challenges. And that is just such a privilege, and it really gives me hope.
Thank you so much, Governor Swift. And to you, Senator Woodson.
Well, what a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate each and every one of you and the Hunt Institute for providing the opportunity. I think, like my colleagues, just the work on the ground in classrooms with children, trying to understand what each individual child needs to be successful, I think is what continues to give me hope. I will tell you that an appetite for high expectations for each and every child gives me excitement and hope. I find that low expectations is its own form of bigotry, and to see convenings like this, to have leaders at every level, whether the classroom level, policymakers, having the tough conversations at a time when there's a lot that's capturing our attention, gives me hope. And I think it's going to take that to not only push through this and recover from this window of time, but to recover and then thrive as a nation.
Thank you, Senator Woodson. Well, needless to say, all three of you give me hope. Let me turn it back to Kyle to wrap it up.
Thanks so much, Laverne, and thanks to all of you in the audience for joining us today. Special thanks to our panelists, Governor Swift, Senator Woodson, and Dr. Salazar, for a fantastic conversation. And I'm excited for each of us to go forward thinking about how we can dive into this important, if unsexy, glass chewing work. We're sorry if we weren't able to get to all of your questions, but please feel free to tweet it to us using the hashtag #GoPrinciples. We'll do our best to answer it or get it over to our panelists. A recording of this webinar will be available immediately on our Facebook page, and we'll be posting a recording to our YouTube channel in the coming days as well. On your screen, you'll see a list of our other upcoming webinars. We have a number of series that span the education continuum, so we truly have something for everyone. Hope to see you on a Zoom again very soon. Finally, at the conclusion of today's webinar, you will be brought to a survey page. We ask you just share your thoughts there so we can continue to make this series a great success. Thanks again to everyone, especially our panelists. Hope you all have a wonderful Tuesday.
Thank you.